I'm here with Jeanne Bolger, and Jeanne, delighted you could join us today for the AIM Studio podcast. When I was doing some research for this interview, there were pages and pages on Google, and they all start something like this. X company is pleased to add Jeanne Bolger to the board. Y company is thrilled to have Jeanne as chair. So there's tons and tons, obviously, about your illustrious career, and we'll get back to that, and we'll talk about that over the course of our chat here. But before we get into that, I'd like to go back a bit and maybe sort of learn a little bit more about Jeanne Bolger, the woman. So maybe we'll start with, where did you grow up? What was your childhood like, Jeanne? Tell us a little bit maybe about your family life.
Of course, yeah, of course. So I'm from Dublin. I am the third of 11 children. Kind of your typical Irish family back in the 1960s, I suppose, maybe. I don't know. It kind of an unusual family, maybe for a woman who has ended up sort of striving to have a career in a period of great emerging recognition of diversity and gender diversity in particular, because I come from a very male-dominated world. I have 9 brothers and 1 sister who is the baby of the family. So I really grew up as an only girl surrounded by boys. 2 older brothers, 7 brothers after me. And then my sister appeared, which was a very special moment in my life. And much later, obviously, when I went on to get married, my husband and I, we had 4 sons. So,
Wow.
and my sister had 3 sons. So yeah, there you go. Kind of a little fact. And yeah, I come, my family background, so I grew up in Dublin, went to school in Dublin, same school the whole way through from 4 to 17. My family background was a business background, really. My father was very much in business, and most of my siblings have ended up in business professions. I have one brother who's a doctor as well. And when I left school, and you're kind of having that decision, what to do with the rest of your life, I actually couldn't really make my mind up, to be honest. And I was always a linguist and a Francophile specifically, although I spoke fluent French and German back in my school days. And I went to live in France for a year before coming back and then deciding to try get into medical school, which I did. The year I did my leaving cert was actually the first year of the CAO business, as far as I remember. Anyhow, 1977 was the first year of the CAO process. So we were kind of the guinea pigs.
And it's not a light decision, Jeanne, to go into medical school. It's a long kind of commitment to begin. What sort of drew you to that, and how did you find it?
So maybe, if I'm honest, I would say it was probably because it was a path that seemed more defined than many other paths. It was a professional qualification from the get-go, and I could get my head around and understand it, and knew that there would be jobs that I could understand at the end of it, even though I didn't come from a medical background. My maternal grandfather was a doctor, and I knew that, but he was much older and had passed away when I was still in school. So I didn't have that much exposure to medicine, apart from, friends, really, I suppose, that were in the medical profession. I absolutely loved medical education. I loved the educational process of becoming a doctor, learning about human science, really. I just was totally fascinated by understanding how the human body worked and how it mightn't work. So I was really, really interested as a student, and then when I qualified, I loved clinical medicine. I actually left clinical medicine very early in my career compared to what people do nowadays to go into the pharmaceutical industry. And in fact, I mentor a lot of people that approach me about, should I stay in medicine? Should I go into the industry? You've done this. how could I do this? And I always start by saying to them, don't do what I did, because frankly, it wouldn't probably work nowadays. I
Well, tell us
joined
what you did.
so I joined the pharmaceutical industry about 3.5 years after I qualified. And my first roles in the industry were distinctly commercial roles, product management, sales, marketing. I did then gravitate back into medical and regulatory affairs, which is a more support function and more science based and development based, like drug development based. But then I went back into commercial roles, and most of my roles have been commercial, but in earlier and earlier stages of the drug development process. And I always say that, like, I ended up being in the industry for something like 37 years, I think. And I always say that um, uh, each step that I took in the industry, I was kind of going backwards, really, in terms of the life cycle of drug discovery and
Mm.
drug development. And I ended up in the really, really earliest stages of that. And I'm not a scientist. Most of the people that I was surrounded by in the industry at that stage, the second half of my career, once I left the commercial piece and went into that more R&D focused piece, but with the business context, the people around me were all PhDs, really. Um, and I really like working with those people, but I don't come from that world, honestly, because medical undergraduate education is very focused on learning the skills you need to deliver patient care, honestly,
Mm.
and learning the science to the extent that you need to understand it to diagnose and treat. So it sort of doesn't get into the details of the underlying biology behind that science.
Mm.
So one of the things, that I often think about, if I was going back, would I do it again? Would I study medicine again? And my answer would be absolutely, because I think it's just a brilliant education
Yeah.
in life. Never mind in medicine. It's just a brilliant education in life.
And Jean, was there a point in your kind of clinical career where an opportunity arose to kind of go down the path you went, or how did you sort of drift towards that direction?
So it was a step that I took totally on my own initiative, kind of mad, really, when I think back on it. If one of my own children was thinking of doing that, I would definitely counsel them against doing it. Like I said earlier, I mentor people and I say, don't do it this way, because it kind of worked for me because I made it work, really. But it isn't, uh, an obvious path to take. Why did I do it then? Is the question. Well, at that time, when I was in clinical medicine, which I loved, um, I was pretty
Sorry,
sure.
what sort of medicine were you doing at that
Well,
point?
that's exactly what I was going to say. So I was, um, I was really at that decision point. What do I do next? I was an SHO isn't even a concept anymore. I don't think an SHO now. It's all about BST, or depending on where you do your training. You specialize pretty early, and I was kind of concluding that I would probably end up in general practice. But I wasn't sure that I really wanted to do general practice. But one thing I was fairly certain of, again, this stems from coming from a family background, which was a business background, that if I was going to be a general practitioner, I would essentially be running a business. And we had had no training and no exposure as undergrads on how to run a business. So I thought, well, I better learn something about that, the business of medicine, if you like, before I then become a GP. And that was my intention initially, was to spend a couple of years in the industry, learn about business, kind of learn how that worked, and then probably go back to clinical medicine and become a GP. That was probably what I intended to do. But like a lot of things in life, I didn't really have a 5-year plan beyond that. And one thing led to another, and I really liked what I was doing. So I just kept following my nose, to be honest. And opportunities presented themselves to me within industry. And I just kept saying yes to things, and I'll have a
Mhm.
go. I'll have a go. Um,
And
so
do
it
you
was
remember what that
really organic.
first opportunity was, or what that first job was? Sort of that first step away from clinical practice and into the new world.
Um, yes, because as I say, I took the deliberate step myself. So having
Mm.
taken that decision that I wanted to try out a more business environment before then settling down to be a GP, I thought, well, where can I do that? I suppose the pharmaceutical industry is an obvious place, because it should be, a transaction of, medicine and business somehow. Um, and so I literally wrote to pharmaceutical companies in Ireland at that time. I literally wrote them letters to say, here I am, this is who I am, this is what I'm interested in doing. Do you have any jobs that might be of interest to me? I literally did that. It was as organic as that. Um, I actually got invited to meet a number of companies based just on that letter. Again, I just can't imagine that working, particularly in this day and age. But it did work for me. And through that sort of outreach process, I got invited into a couple of different processes of actually ongoing interviews where they were looking to hire physicians for different roles. Um, and one of them was a marketing role with a French pharmaceutical company called Servier Laboratories. Now, remember, I told you I was a bit of a Francophile. I had
Mm.
a fluent French. I'd lived in France for a year. So that was kind of another, sign. Maybe I kind of thought that could be interesting. There's another skill set that I could exploit. I worked for a French pharmaceutical company. And, I did subsequently then, give business presentations in French at head office and stuff like that. It's a bit outside the box, really, for an Irish junior doctor, really, So,
Yeah. Yeah. But you obviously had a lot of, would you say you had a lot of confidence, or um, you were more kind of give it a go sort of a person?
uh, yeah, I probably would be described as a very confident person, really. I think so. People would probably say that about me, I think. Uh, and maybe it was growing up in a big family and being a girl among a lot of boys. I was always very competitive, and we were a very competitive family, I suppose, internally. Your job in our family was always to kind of get a better leaving cert than your older siblings.
It was tough on the last one, I'm sure.
Exactly, exactly. But they did get better and better, I have to tell you, so it does work. So anyhow, yeah,
So you kind of carved your path then, obviously, from medicine and sort
yeah,
of into this pharma world, and
yeah.
then sort of to innovation. Sort of talk us kind of through the path there then.
So even in the early days, like I said, I really loved, and I wasn't that long out of the learning part of medicine, because I was only 3.5 years qualified when I first joined the industry. And part of my job, that I kind of made my job really was to train the sales representatives, the medical representatives, in the sort of basic science underlying what they were trying to promote to doctors out in the field. Okay. And so the company that I joined, we were in cardiovascular. Medicine and metabolic disease, particularly diabetes. That was kind of most of what we did as a company. And so I used to like literally write the training programs, the training manuals myself, using my own historic notes from physiology and pathology and um, which I still had, of course, because I wasn't that long qualified. And so I really engaged in the science and the education very actively. Again, pretty much on my own accord. And so worked a lot with the reps, helping them understand, you know, what the evidence, scientific evidence was, the medical evidence and clinical evidence for the products that they were selling, and kind of teaching them really how to do really good, strong scientific communication, sells to the poor GPs that they were then facing in surgery, maybe, and I set up, medical affairs and really got to engage with the GPs and the consultants that we worked with, so I really brought a lot of that educational aspect to my job. And so that kind of then morphed into, in a subsequent role at Smith Beecham, which was my next job. I established a medical department there, and I was head of medical and regulatory affairs, medical director basically for the company in Ireland. And that was both consumer health and prescription medicines that Smith Beecham had in their portfolio, and I represented all of those. So I did an awful lot of meetings and medical meetings and presentations to doctors, etc. So I really engaged with the medical science piece all through my career, actually. Um, And then that naturally, there was kind of a pivot point later on. I took on I went back into sales and marketing and then I took on a European marketing role. This was still at SmithKline Beecham, and then um, things just happen a bit kind of, uh, um, I would say, in an unpredictable way. Obviously, in the industry, big business transactions happen, and SmithKline Beecham merged with Glaxo Wellcome in 2000, and I was there at that time, and I was in a fairly senior marketing role at SmithKline Beecham, and my boss was appointed at the time of the merger to GlaxoSmithKline as global head of business development, and he sought to build his own team de novo, and he selected people that he knew, and he approached me and said, would you like to come into business development now to lead scientific licensing for one of the therapy areas of the business? Honestly, I can say I didn't have the first notion what that job entailed, but I was like, it sounded really interesting. So I was like, yeah, I'll have a go at that. So pretty much every job I took on day one, I genuinely had no idea what the job entailed. No, you know. So it was a bit like being an intern day one all over again repeatedly. So I kind of liked the energy that brought. And I am that sort of person. I get very driven by, the dynamic of being, on a burning platform and trying to figure out things quickly and find solutions and work with people to navigate, completely different areas. So
Yeah.
I did that for a number of years, and I
Yeah.
transitioned from there to J&J, also in business development. Yeah.
Yeah. And then from once you got to J&J, you ended up obviously with JJDC and into this whole sort of the venture world. And
And that was a good few years later. So yeah, I joined J&J to head up a division within the global business development group. Okay, so I had a team of people reporting to me, and so that was kind of completely different dynamic as well. But we were leading major mergers and acquisitions, and my team was, contributing to those. And these are all multidisciplinary teams, so it's really phenomenally fast moving and really exciting place to work, but also embedded in the science. And in business development, both at GSK and J&J, we were responsible for, deals that could be anything from early research collaborations with an academic institution or an early stage biotech company, right through to global marketing deals with an established pharmaceutical company. So it was really, really broad, Again, that was just an incredible sort of merging of science and business, which I just discovered each time I stepped into one of these new roles. I realized this is totally me. This is what I like. It really drives me. It's exciting. It's fast moving. It's kind of full of um, hidden traps, that you have to navigate and you have to figure out, and negotiations. And I found I loved legal documents and kind of getting into difficult and, you know, complex negotiations. That all of that stuff just really, really worked for me. So then um, I there was an interim period for 3 years where I moved into one of the deals that we did, which was in the Alzheimer's field, and I was general manager of a company we established to manage that transaction, which was an unusual transaction between J&J and Elan, the Irish pharmaceutical company at the time. And so by the way, I mentioned earlier, from big family, and then I had a reasonably big family myself, I suppose, 4 sons and whatever. But for all of this business development career, it involved global travel. So I was away from home. I was living in Ireland, but away from home 4 or 5 days a week, every week, with young kids, and so it was, again, a bit unusual.
yeah,
Thankfully, a very supportive husband who tolerated that and, helped to raise the kids along with, helpful people helping us, nannies and au pairs and family, so it was kind of an interesting time. But for 20 years, I actually traveled internationally.
yeah.
And so that 3-year period, when I took on that role with the company we formed to manage the Alzheimer's portfolio from Milan, I found myself back in Dublin for 3 years, which was fantastic. But I was
Mm.
still traveling because we were collaborating with Pfizer, um, and our R&D division was in San Francisco. So I was traveling to both New York and San Francisco pretty much every month, you know.
Wow.
So, but it was a lot easier than traveling every week,
My
to put it
goodness.
that way.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a bit wild. It was a bit wild. But then again, just one of these things that happens, almost accidental, really, how I fell into the venture world because I didn't know that world. Even though I worked in business development, you didn't really engage with the world of venture
Mm.
in those days. Um, but the program collapsed basically because the phase 3 program failed in a phase 3 study, and we basically took the whole construct apart again, exited the collaboration with Pfizer, and basically reconstructed this company that had about 200 people working in it. You know, tried to find them new jobs in J&J or find them other jobs from outside, and we ourselves, the management team, which I sat on, had to find new jobs for ourselves.
And would
Uh,
that be common enough, Jean, for a phase 3 drug to fail at that point? Is that fairly regular
yeah,
occurrence in
yeah,
that
it
world?
is, unfortunately. Yeah. I would say it depends on the area that you're in, but if you're in neurodegenerative diseases,
Hmm.
there are now two similar drugs to the one we were trying to develop, it's a monoclonal antibody targeting amyloid protein in the brain. Um, there are now two drugs on the market in the US that are very similar to what we were trying to develop. But there have been many failures. Like every other drug that's ever been developed in that space has failed. So yes, things do get as far as phase 3 and then fail. Um, yeah.
Which must be
So
pretty devastating for
it's
the.
devastating, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you live, day to day in that world, if you're in a big pharmaceutical company, hopefully you will be able to move on to another project. But if you live in a small biotech company and that's your only asset, then it's
Mm.
end game, right?
Mm.
Except that there are other biotech companies. So it is kind of the world that we live in. Again, it's full of traps. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very difficult, and translational medicine is, yeah, really, really difficult. And
Yeah.
you think um nowadays most obvious things have been discovered, have been developed or on the market in terms of drugs, right? So the
Yeah.
stuff that's left to do is all hard stuff. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
all hard stuff.
So from a venture capitalist perspective, is that not a very kind of risky game to get into then?
Super, super risky. Now, if you've got the fire cover of being in a corporate venture fund like in J&J, you've got that sort of protection that you're part of a big organization, and you're doing just the venture piece of it. Uh, but if you're in a fund, yeah, you're only as good as your last deal, really. That's the
Mm.
truth of it.
So tell us a little bit then about kind of how you got into that venture world at J&J and
So,
obviously you're starting to tell us
yeah,
that from
absolutely. So what had happened in my sort of day job at that time, as I say, we were basically exiting that transaction in the Alzheimer's space, uh, and closing down the program. And meanwhile, J&J was establishing a new model for external innovation, which involved establishing these small biotech-like innovation centers in the areas where there was most innovation happening. And they were in the Bay Area in San Francisco. They were setting up an innovation center there in the Boston area, in the Cambridge area of Boston, uh, and then in London as a springboard into broader Europe, because there isn't a single center of innovation really in Europe. And of course, this was pre-Brexit. So the UK was part of EU at that time. Um, and so they were populating those centers with, on the one hand, scientists that came from the R&D groups in the relevant strategic areas of interest to J&J, but also they were putting investors from the venture fund of J&J in those centres so that they could work side by side with scientists who were looking for innovative science. And we
Mm,
could leverage that scientific knowledge and that sort of therapeutic interest in different companies and technologies, and look at prosecuting that innovation through a broad range of ways, one of which would be investing in those companies and becoming a shareholder.
mm,
So that was what they were doing. They'd never had the fund, as is very long standing. Actually, J&J's corporate venture fund was established in 1973, which makes it uh, the oldest corporate venture fund in any industry, not just in life sciences. So it's a very long-standing area of investment activity that J&J has had. But they had worked up to that point very independently of the mainstream pharmaceutical organization or medical device or consumer health organization. We had three kind of pillars to the business at that time.
mm.
And so um, this was kind of a new model for them to co-locate their investors where there were scientists that were also employees of the R&D organization. So, but that was the model, and they needed an investor based in London. And so I was asked, did I want to take on that role? Again, I had no clue how to do that, how to be a venture investor, how to invest in a company, how to take a board seat in a a third party company that we only had a minority interest in. But that's what I learned to do very quickly.
Fantastic. And do you think your medical training, Jean, sort of helped shape your approach for these roles outside of clinical work, or do you think it gave you kind of an edge? And I suppose the follow on to that is, do you think it's possible, or is it even wise for clinicians to kind of straddle both innovation and practice, or is it best to go all in on one, do you think?
Oh, I'm a strong believer in the concept that's very well established in the US, in particular, being an MD, PhD. You know, I said earlier, I was thinking of pursuing a career in general practice. I now know all these years later that probably wouldn't have been a good career plan for me. Honestly, I think I wouldn't have got the sort of job satisfaction out of it that I have got of what I have done. Um, I if I knew then what I know now, that kind of hindsight, uh, I I probably would have, found an area of scientific interest within medicine where I could have done exactly that, stayed in medicine, but tried to stay close to innovation because it's just uniquely fascinating. And, the realization that I had was that, as a physician, you can definitely change the lives of the patients whose lives you touch and you treat. Uh, but as a physician engaged in innovative science and drug discovery and drug development, you can change potentially the lives, not on your own, obviously, but with huge number of helping hands and a lot of dollars. You can change the lives of millions of people, literally. So it's pretty amazing place to
It's the
be.
scale version of medicine, really, isn't
It
it?
really is, and it's
Yeah.
it's just a great job to wake up to every morning to know that A, you might make a difference in a very small way, but at a very big scale. Okay. Um,
Yeah.
and B, that even if you don't make a difference that day, you will definitely learn something new. Every single day that you work in this job, you learn something that you didn't know before. And that's a great reason to get out of bed, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, you've said sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that would be the most compelling reason to think about, a career in innovation. Now, to answer your question though, should every doctor think that way? Absolutely not, but I think that every medical educational system should think that broadly, should think like I consider uh, it to have been a gift to have studied medicine and learned to become a doctor. And I do bring that thought process to my job every day. It really does matter to be able to bring to the perspective when you're sitting down with, you know, um, biochemists, molecular biologists, and really, really smart people, and they're trying to invent new drugs, to be able to bring the perspective of what that piece of innovation might mean and how it might translate into a patient benefit. And is it going to make a difference? Because if it's
Hmm.
not going to make a difference, there's not a whole lot of point to it, you know,
Yeah.
because it's a
Yeah.
very high risk endeavor. And there's no point anymore. When I joined the industry, there was a lot of dollars being invested in Me Too drugs. That's
Mm.
genuinely not happening anymore in the industry. People are being very thoughtful in the industry about developing drugs where there really is a need for them, addressing difficult problems, rare diseases, um, or common diseases where there's still a large unmet need, where the solutions that
Mm.
are there are still not adequate. So,
Mm.
yeah, I think it's great thought process to bring to the job.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you've sat on a ton of boards from biotechs to diagnostics. W- what do you think, what differentiates companies that thrive from those that don't? Or what's the biggest mistake you see founders make, either when they're seeking investment or they've secured it, or just in general?
Um, Biggest mistake that founders make. Maybe it's quite commonly that if they're coming at it from perspective of, this is my life's work working on this particular molecular target or something like that. So I'm just going to dig a hole in this particular part of the field until I find a diamond in the rough. Um, that's probably not going to happen. That's probably not going to happen because to be successful in this very, very difficult space of life science innovation, you just have to have a very open mind and you have to be prepared to be wrong and to be proven wrong or not quite right, maybe,
Mm.
because if you if you convince yourself that your invention, that your patent, that's the only thing that you're ever going to work on, you're going to find somebody who'll give you money for it and that you'll translate that into a drug, that's actually the hardest starting point of all.
Mm.
Sometimes you've just got to keep your antennae open, and your starting position may indeed be that. And that may be your kind of sweet spot and where you're most comfortable because it's where your PhD was or where you've spent your life's work on. But by listening to other people and being open to other ideas, you may actually come up with something that's truly much better, that will still benefit from your contribution, but it'll be more sideways, not as direct. So, eh, I think founders, I've had so many innovators and founders of companies come to us for investment. And when I say us, I mean in whichever role I've been, either you know, I'm now a venture partner with a venture fund, or, previous to that within J&J in business development, or in J&J as part of JJDC. That they get very frustrated. They think people aren't listening to them and they're not hearing them and not recognizing how wonderful their piece of innovation is. But they can be very blinded
Hmm.
to the one thing that they're thinking about and less open, then they miss cues and they miss signals that, uh, a fund is going to look at maybe 400 deals a year and only invest in one or two of them a year.
Mm.
So they're much more likely to be one of the, 398 that they're going to say no to than the two that they're going to invest in. And that's not personal. That's just not personal. It's
Hmm.
just, but there might still be advice, there might be signals, and they might be barking up the wrong tree. So, yeah, have an open mind, work with other innovators. If your idea if it's not resonating with people, there are probably good reasons for that. And
Mm.
by, continually plugging away at it may not be the best use of your time. You might be better to think a little bit more outside the box and to figure out a different way to the same problem.
What role do you think diversity plays in successful boards and startups, whether that's background, thought, gender?
I think diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of approach is extraordinarily important. Diversity of gender, because educationally, I think, and even maybe genetically, uh, you know, eh, come at things a different way. Different genders do come across, and depending on your educational background, you will have a different starting point and a different ending point. So putting all of those ideas and being open as a board, having a diverse composition, and then being open as a board to entertain diverse approaches is incredibly important. Uh, Otherwise, boards can become really talk shops and echo chambers. And that's very, very dangerous from a governance point of view and also from an outcomes point of view. The outcomes will be better with more
Mhm.
diverse input. Uh,
And speaking kind of diversity, we're seeing more and more women enter medicine or enter medical school, obviously, but still relatively few like yourself in senior STEM or investment roles. What do you think needs to change there? Does something need to change? What are your thoughts there?
Well, there are a lot of efforts ongoing to change those things, and yes, uh, I suppose organizations have become more gender diverse at the entry rank level, and that has not yet translated into either C-suite uh, or board diversity. So that is work in progress. I am a believer in um, the need for mandates, to really force that issue. I don't think you can force a board to hire diverse people or a company to hire diverse senior people, but you can mandate that their starting point, the panel they look at, must be diverse. And that usually results in a different mindset and different choices being made. Yeah. So,
Okay,
but there's a lot of work to be done there for sure.
great. Thanks, Jean. So now a little more rapid fire kind of questions,
Okay.
maybe based around sort of personal reflection or advice. Where's home these days for you?
Home is mostly Dublin, Ireland, but I do have a base in London as well, so that I can pick up on a lot of my connections and network in the UK, because it's a very lively ecosystem for life sciences. And I do spend as much time as I can in the west of Ireland, where I am right now, where we have a holiday home. So, yeah, I'm moving around a fair bit.
And what do you do when you're not working? If there's ever a point when you're not working, how do you switch off?
I'm pretty surprisingly good at switching off, actually. I play a lot of golf. My whole family plays a lot of golf. Very badly in my case, I have to admit, but I love it. So, and I do a bit of Pilates and, yeah, spend time with family. Yeah, so pretty normal stuff, I would say. Nothing too unusual.
Yeah. What's one piece of advice you would give to someone just starting out as a founder? Or I want to change that a little bit
Yeah.
to a clinician who, might be at the point you were all those years ago, or a clinician who might be well into their profession and are sort of thinking about changing. I know you said you mightn't do it mightn't take the route you took. What sort of advice would you give someone looking to kind of maybe move laterally or change completely?
Well, I think, people obviously, if that's a real strong imperative for them, yeah, I usually say to them, look, just sort of create a balance sheet of where you are right now. What is it you love about what you've done so far, both academically in terms of the learning process and operationally in terms of the job? Make a list of all the things you love about it, make a list of the things you hate about it and that you really need to change. And, then just look at that very logically and very pragmatically and say, you know, where do I need to go to make those changes? Within medicine itself, quite frankly, if you really find, and many doctors do find, that they don't love patient contact or if they don't love dealing with administration or with, um, you know, hospital admin or whatever, even just those simple things, there's so many disciplines. It's such a broad education. There's so many disciplines within medicine that you can make choices that allow you to pursue the things you really enjoy. If it's being in the lab, you really want to be in the lab. And, there's many other scientists that say they really want to be out of the lab. They want to be in business. So, it's really trying to create that balance sheet, and then recognize that your skill set is very adaptable, and the skills that you've acquired uh, are very useful to you in any area. So you can truly go anywhere you want to. You just have to have the ambition. And the problem about making the big jumps like I did, I suppose, is that you do really have to go down to the bottom of the ladder in those other areas. And that mightn't be the best entry point. So if you really have an ambition to work in the pharmaceutical industry, and most people that approach me are seriously thinking of jumping ship into the pharmaceutical industry from clinical medicine, and I would always say to them, look, do that at the right point in your career where skills that you bring can add the most value to the industry, because then you enter at a much higher point. And
Mm.
so I would generally say to people who are like my younger self, don't jump when I jumped. Actually, if you think that there's a specialty that you're really interested in pursuing, put in the hard yards and get to the qualification that you need to have under your belt, specialist qualification, so that you really have some choices. You may then decide that actually you love academia and you want to be in academic medicine, or that you like teaching and that you really don't like patient contact. That's a different choice then, okay? Or you may want to take those skills at that point into the industry and help with drug development. And you have a much better starting point because you're an expert, and they will hire you as an expert, not really as I would have been hired to as a learner. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Um, at the bottom of the food chain, if you like,
Good advice.
yeah,
Yeah.
that would be it.
Um, Great, thank you. When you take a step back, Jean, and look at everything, what are you most proud of professionally?
Um, I, in myself, I suppose if it was a church on myself, I'm proud that I was brave enough to take, what were some pretty risky steps if I think back. And maybe I was crazy, but they did work out for me. And I think I sort of demonstrated enough resilience to kind of stick with it and make things work that mightn't otherwise have worked. So I am proud of that. Uh, um, I'm I'm sort of probably on a personal level, I'm really proud of my family, really, that they survived all of that because I put them through the mill, honestly. And I've got 4 adult sons now who are pursuing their own careers. And I'm incredibly proud of how they've been able to pursue very different careers. Uh,
What are they doing? They're not going the same direction.
Well, so from my youngest to my oldest, my youngest son has just finished his master's in architecture, and he's a lot to look forward to. So I'm very excited for him in his creative endeavors. My next son up thought about getting into medicine, didn't get in there, did engineering instead, and is now in investment banking, in healthcare investment banking, wherever he got that idea, right? He's doing he's doing really great there. And my next son up, second oldest son, is a music producer and has just published a book on Irish baby names, by the way. So shout out to anybody who's looking for a nice gift um, for a baby shower.
Yeah.
And my oldest son actually did a business degree first, did a degree in economics first, and then ended up in graduate entry medicine, and has just been appointed as a consultant to a post in Ireland as an interventional radiologist. So he did ultimately, again, through a rather strange route, really, follow me into medicine eventually, but stayed with it. So I'm
Terrific,
very proud.
terrific.
I'm very proud of him.
All brave moves and
Yeah, exactly.
diverse careers.
Yeah,
Where could
exactly.
they have learned that from?
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, listen, Jean, thanks a million for talking to us today. We really
Not
appreciate it.
pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. And I know you've probably got major plans for the next phase of your career, and I'm sure they'll be as diverse and exciting and as successful as the last ones have been. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much, and best of luck to Ames.